The Mahatmas by Patience Edensor Sinnett. This is an extract from her work The Purpose of Theosophy, published in 1885, read by Dave Marsland of Cardiff Theosophical Society. The Mahatmas. It has been already said that there are two classes of exceptionally constituted people who have within themselves certain phenomenal faculties, these being roughly defined as the trained and the untrained. The latter group, embracing seers, clairvoyants and mediums, has been briefly dealt with, and it is now proposed to give the reader some information respecting the former group, that is to say, those who, in addition to being born with some or all of the abnormal attributes above enumerated, have from youth upwards gone through a special course of training for the development of their psychic powers. It is commonly assumed that education on the physical plane renders an individual, whether exceptionally talented or the reverse, more capable of systematizing his ideas and more able to use them to advantage for the good of the human race than if he is left to run wild, gathering his experiences in an unmethodical manner and from perhaps untrustworthy sources, without proper instruction and assistance by those who have by time and study acquired practical and theoretical information in the well-beaten grooves of scholastic life. This being granted in regard to ordinary education, it is only rational to allow that experience, guidance and instruction is equally, if not more necessary in the education of the spiritual faculties. That large numbers are at this moment going through such training and development, and others hoping to do so in the future, is at least recognised by some people in the West, and has in the East been an accepted fact from time immemorial. The result of this psychological training is shown to its full extent in the brotherhood to which the Mahatmas belong. The true seer or adept is enabled, in consequence of the special training he has gone through, to disembarrass his higher principles when engaged in the exercise of their faculties from all connection with the lower. The knowledge thus obtained can only be acquired or perceived in its integrity by these higher principles when they are unpolluted by attachment to the lower, and when approached by the untrained clairvoyant is misconstrued and mixed up with the fancies and recollections of the physical brain, the functions of which, as an uninstructed psychic, he does not know how to render, for the time being inoperative. The past adept, when in the state necessary for the reception of this sort of experience, is able to suspend the mechanical action of the brain, his spiritual sight thus becoming clear and uninfluenced by the admixture of the physical memory. This abstracted state is called in Hindu writings samadhi, and is considered the highest condition of spirituality attainable by humanity while in the body. While on this subject, it will be as well to quote again from Isis Unveiled. There are two kinds of seership, that of the soul and that of the spirit, but as the visions of both depend upon the greater or less acuteness of the astral body, they differ very widely from the perfect omniscient spiritual state, for at best the subject can get but glimpses of truth through the veil which physical nature interposes. The astral principle of mind, called by the Hindu yogi Bhavatma, is the sentient soul inseparable from our physical brain, which it holds in subjection, and is in its turn equally trammelled by it. This is the ego, the intellectual life principle of man, his conscious entity. When the body is in the state of dharana, a total catalepsy of the physical frame, the soul of the clairvoyant may liberate itself and perceive things subjectively, and yet, as the sentient principle of the brain is alive and active, these pictures of the past, present and future will be tinctured with the terrestrial perceptions of the objective world. The physical memory and fancy will be in the way of clear vision. But the seer adept knows how to suspend the mechanical action of the brain. His visions will be as clear as truth itself, uncoloured and undistorted, whereas the clairvoyant, unable to control the vibrations of the astral waves, will perceive but more or less broken images through the medium of the brain. The seer can never take flickering shadows for realities. He receives impressions directly from his spirit. Between his subjective and objective selves there are no obstructive mediums. This is the real spiritual seership, in which, according to an expression of Plato, soul is raised above all inferior good. This psychological education, which aspirants for admission into the community of adepts have to undergo, is not given in a speculative or tentative manner, but is rather a regular mode of instruction, the rules for which are rigid and absolutely unavoidable, these having been in practice and handed down from one generation to another for thousands of years, since, indeed, humanity first evolved on this globe. The custodians of this school of knowledge are variously called Mahatmas, Rishis, Arhats, Adepts, Gurudevas, Brothers, etc. by their respective followers in different countries or religions, and contain within their number representatives of many nationalities. The majority of them now live in Tibet, although isolated members of the community are to be found elsewhere in far distant countries. They possess a knowledge of the hidden workings of nature and of causes which produce the phenomena of the physical world. This enables them to produce, without other mechanism than their own willpower, phenomena that upset all the theories that workers in physical science have in the course of many years gradually built up and are still acting upon. They can defy matter, distance, even death itself. They can create and disintegrate, that is to say, they are able to gather the elements out of the akasha necessary for the production of material objects and cause them to become visible and tangible, as they can dissipate such objects into their original molecules, which at once diffuse themselves through the astral light and become invisible to the physical eye. They can take cognizance of people and their thoughts regardless of distance, impress, influence, and directly communicate with them. What the late Lord Lytton in his Coming Race described as vril power, the Mahatmas undoubtedly possess and can wield. They recognise, and practically use for various psychological purposes, the different principles spoken of previously as forming the constitution of man, and have, in the routine of their training, developed their higher principles while at the same time subduing the lower ones to such a state of perfection that the real spiritual man is independent of and altogether master of the material body, and can consequently leave it for long periods of time. The ego belonging thereto, in the meantime acquiring real knowledge in other spheres, which on his return to earth goes to strengthen and support the block of such knowledge belonging to the Brotherhood. It is well known in India that fakirs and yogis can, by the practice of asceticism and certain physical exercises, such as sitting for a long time together in a particular position, breathing at intervals laid down in accepted rules, etc., attain undoubtedly psychological powers and perform physical phenomena. This kind of training is called Hatha Yoga, while the higher description as taught by the true adepts is called Raj Yoga. Between these two modes of education, for the attainment of abnormal powers, there is an enormous difference. The gap that separates the two, from the lowest form of the one to the highest of the other, being filled in by followers of all the many and various religions and sects scattered over the whole of Asia. These include the juggler, who can, perhaps, practice a humble kind of sorcery for a small remuneration, and the holy man or yogi, who lives an ascetic and solitary life, passing his time in meditation and religious practices, harming no one, but, on the contrary, doing good to the extent of bringing home to the uneducated people who visit him the desirability of leading a pure life now, in order that they may attain happiness in the future. But far above the best of these yogis, and that many of them are examples of passive holiness, spirituality and purity, there is no doubt, stand the Mahatmas. For they are the direct inheritors and guardians of the ancient wisdom religion, and of the accumulated spiritual experience of those who have had charge of the world since humanity appeared thereon. And when an aspirant to initiation reaches up and attains adeptship, his further advancement and spiritual education is by no means at an end. For in spiritual culture, even more than in mundane, it would seem that the further a student goes, the wider grows the prospect before him. So that members of this venerated community, of which Europeans know so little, not only in their progress gain the personal and recorded wisdom of their contemporaries and predecessors, but they, as it were, test its accuracy as they go on step by step. And this intimacy with the working of the unseen hand that guides the universe, which gives to the adepts their supremacy in all matters relating to physical and other sciences, is acquired by them not as the aim and end of their aspirations, but accrues to them by degrees, while still chelas or neophytes in the line of study organise for their development, and is only a stepping stone to the more sublime philosophy, acquaintanceship with which helps them to comprehension of this divine and immutable law that reigns everywhere alike, both in the visible and invisible worlds around us, equally in things spiritual and physical. For just as it is impossible to find out the exact moment when the mineral gives place to a vegetable growth or the vegetable becomes an animal, so it is likewise hopelessly difficult to determine the boundary which separates matter from spirit. The attention of mankind may be, first of all, attracted to this brotherhood, the members of which have raised themselves to such a tremendous height above their fellow creatures, by the striking and overwhelming powers with which they are endowed. But the student of their doctrine soon comes to regard even these as of inferior interest to the broad and enlightened views of the past and future of humanity, and its relation to and position in the scheme of the universe to be obtained by their help. Their existence as human beings has been often, and still is, questioned by many. But, on the other hand, hundreds of people have not only seen and spoken with them, but some have even lived under the same roof with their own Mahatmas for years together, and naturally during that time have witnessed numberless instances of their powers in various directions. It is not, however, the purpose of this little book, as said before, to bring forward proofs of the statements made in it. These the reader can look for, and certainly find elsewhere. But it may be mentioned perhaps in regard to this particular statement as to the existence of the adepts, that the student will find it not only supported in the sacred books of the East, which are replete with references to the rishis, but also by the verbal assurance of reliable witnesses who have seen and converse with their own adept guru, both in the body and also astrally, when separated by thousands of miles. This separability of the astral from the material body in life is by no means so very uncommon, even among Western people, who are quite unconnected with Eastern modes of training and who have no knowledge of the Mahatmas. And it is perfectly well known among certain circles of society that this particular faculty is frequently resorted to by those still in life who wish to visit and communicate with their relatives and friends who have passed away into another state of existence. Moreover, 2 or more astrals will make this journey in company, remembering accurately on their return to their respective bodies the conversations they have had with their dead friends, as well as the appearance and leading features of the scenery and country they have traversed in finding these friends. Therefore, if some among us can have such experiences without having gone through a lifelong training, or having had any special guidance, why should the existence of the brothers be doubted because their pupils maintain they get such astral visits from their masters when they know that their bodies are hundreds of miles away? Again, if an untrained person finds that he can leave his body at will and traverse the invisible worlds around, bringing back the record of his travels and impressions, how much more possible it is to believe that the adept who, in addition to the natural qualities with which, like the seer, he is at birth in possession of, has been for long years devoting himself to their development, aided by the experience and knowledge of those who, for many generations past, have trodden the same path before him. And why should we find it unreasonable to suppose that these initiatives should have within their keeping a transcendental philosophy which has for its foundation truth and spiritual knowledge? It must be remembered also that adeptship is not the result of the work of one life, for the way up to that high point in human evolution cannot be attained in so short a time, even under the most favourable conditions. These conditions belonging to some of the many mysteries that have to be unriddled by a student in his way along the path that leads to a comprehension of occult science. The first spark of interest in mysticism, which gradually unfolds itself in any given individual by reading and study, is probably due to some slight contact in a previous birth with people of like tendencies. The reading and theoretical education which he encourages in himself in this life will have its results in his next incarnation, when perhaps he will be strong enough to force himself, by his earnestness, purity of life and spirituality, on the notice of a master, and eventually become a probationary chela. Once an accepted chela, his progress towards initiation depends upon the mental, physical, moral and intellectual attributes which he may then develop, and there are many initiations to be passed through before adeptship is reached, which we are told is only achieved after a long and weary probation, during which period the man is tried, tested and proved at every step in his upward course, not only in regard to all bodily desires and feelings, but also to his mental and intellectual qualifications. For to be a Mahatma means to be the embodiment of knowledge, power and justice. It is the goal for which unconsciously humanity is struggling, to which the majority will eventually attain through the long course of trials, experiences and pleasures that all have to undergo in the birth and rebirth of the ego in its many incarnations. Those who are anxious to shorten the journey to this far distant haven of rest from earthly existence can only do so by leaving the highway, which, though comparatively smooth and of easy ascent, is very long, and taking to the mountain paths that lead directly to the top, for those who are at the same time fearless and faithful.